listener production.
Hi, Natarsha Belling with you and welcome to the afternoon edition of The Briefing. Coming up in our deep dive, young people are drinking less alcohol, but more than 70% say they've used other drugs. They're experimenting more with sex, but not well educated when it comes to sexual health. We unpack the new research that's offering a rare insight into how attitudes, behaviours and risks are changing. But first, let's check the afternoon headlines this Wednesday, the 4th of February. The federal government will sell off more than $3 billion worth of defence land after a major audit found dozens of sites serve no strategic purpose. Properties including Victoria Barracks in Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane are earmarked for sale, with some land potentially redeveloped for housing. Defence Minister Richard Marles says the sell-off will save around $100 million a year just in maintenance, with all proceeds reinvested into defence capability ahead of the AUKUS submarine program.
This is constrained by the weight of its past when it comes to management of the estate. Today's estate footprint comprises numerous legacy sites without a clear ongoing link to current or future capabilities. Urgent interventions are needed to correct the unsustainable trajectory that has resulted from decades of deferred decisions on contentious estate issues.
Clive Palmer has announced he will launch a High Court challenge to Labor's new electoral donation caps set to come into effect from the 1st of July. Mr Palmer has accused Labor and the Liberals of colluding to limit how much smaller parties and independents can raise so they can protect their political dominance. Here is the former head of the United Australia Party, Clive Palmer.
The Australian Parliament, in my view, does not have the power to stop members of federal Parliament raising funds to carry out their oath of office in accordance with the High Court ruling on the right of political free speech in Australia.
Heading overseas now, and the US military says they've shot down an Iranian drone that was approaching an American aircraft carrier. The drone was destroyed by an F-35 fighter jet as it flew aggressively towards the USS Abraham Lincoln in the Arabian Sea, with what the Pentagon described as, quote, unclear intent. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt says despite the latest incident, scheduled talks between Washington and Tehran will continue.
President Trump is always wanting to pursue diplomacy first, but obviously it takes two to tango. You need a willing partner to achieve diplomacy, and that's something that Special Envoy Witkoff is intent on exploring and discussing. As always, though, of course, the president has a range of options on the table with respect to Iran.
And Bunnings may have a solution to the housing crisis. They're now selling tiny homes in a flat pack for a starting price of around $26,000 for a studio measuring about 2.7 metres by 2.4 metres. Designed and built by a Melbourne startup, the structures can be assembled in a matter of days, with permits set to vary depending on the state and or council. Now it's time to get into our deep dive. Every year, hundreds of young Australians aged between 15 to 29 take part in the Burnet Institute's Sex, Drugs and Rock and Roll survey, a look into the behaviours, attitudes and well-being of our nation's youth. First launched at the Big Day Out in Melbourne more than a decade ago, the survey covers sexual behaviours, alcohol and drug use, giving us a rare and long-term insight into how young people are living, thinking and experimenting. The study's lead researcher, Megan Lim, joins us to break down the latest findings, exploring what's changing, what's worrying and what it means for young Australians today. Megan, why is this research so important to give a bit of an insight into what young people are doing at the moment?
I think it's because young people's behaviours are really changing a lot, especially with changes to the social society, like the rise of social media and other things have really influenced how young people's behaviours and health and attitudes and perceptions have all been going over the past couple of decades. So we're able to kind of quickly capture small changes and emerging issues in a fast way that we can respond with larger studies or other details.
And Megan, for you, from an overall point of view, and we'll get into the specifics in a moment, but what were the standouts for you about the big changes in young people's attitudes or behaviours?
I think there's quite a few things. We do cover a lot of topics in this study. One thing is in terms of alcohol, we've been seeing a fairly stable decrease in alcohol consumption among young people over the past couple of decades. This is something that's been noted worldwide, really, in all sorts of countries, with young people being more likely to completely abstain from alcohol, starting drinking later, and often drinking less when they do drink as well. A few other things that are changing are in terms of sexual behaviour. We're noting that young people report later initiation of sexual behaviours and also engaging in more diverse behaviours, I guess, such as like oral sex has become much more common than vaginal intercourse. And even though we found there's been no change in condom use in the past 10 years, we have noted increases in use of long-acting reversible contraceptions like Implanon and IUDs.
So in regards to sexual health, that's a really interesting area of research, Megan, with these results. There seems to be a bit of a disconnect between awareness and behaviour regarding sexual health. Breaking down some of those stats, regarding chlamydia in particular, only 50% were aware that chlamydia can cause infertility, and 56% realised it can be diagnosed with a urine test. Do you think there is a lack of knowledge regarding young people and their sexual health, or do you think this is okay, this research at the moment?
Definitely some room to improve there. I mean, to me, it doesn't specifically matter what infections young people know about and the details of those. I think it's just really important that they're aware that there are a lot of different STIs and that many of them are treatable. Many of them only require simple tests for diagnosis, like a urine test. Having an STI doesn't have to be the end of the world. It doesn't require massive medical procedure. It's just a quick checkup, pee in a cup, and you can get some antibiotics to treat it. And then obviously the infertility part of it is the reason why it's important to do that, because by treating it, you avoid long-term consequences.
Is prevention better than a treatment or a cure though?
Of course, and we know that condoms are the best way to protect against STIs. We found in our study that around half of young people reported using a condom the last time they had sex, and that's been fairly stable over the past 10 years.
Let's move into, Megan, the alcohol and drug use with this research. You mentioned earlier that alcohol use has started to decrease, and we've seen this as a trend over a number of years. But it's interesting to see that more than 7 in 10 of the respondents surveyed had used other drugs at some point, and 45% had done so in the past month.
Yeah, that's right. We have found that around half of young people have used illicit drugs in the past month. The most commonly used one is marijuana. And the types of other drugs that young people have been using has been changing over time. We don't really know why. I guess it's to do with availability as well as different preferences. But drugs like ketamine and cocaine have become more popular, whereas ecstasy, MDMA, has become less popular.
So, Megan, in regards to why you're seeing an increase in drug use rather than alcohol use, although alcohol is a legalised drug, was there any reasoning, or did the respondents give any indication? Was an affordability factor with alcohol so expensive? What did they speak about?
Well, more people still are using alcohol than illicit drugs, but the trend is going downwards. I think there's many reasons that could potentially explain this change in alcohol. So one reason is affordability for sure. Alcohol's getting more expensive in Australia, but it's still the case in other countries where that hasn't happened, that people are drinking less. We know that young people in some ways are more health conscious now. They're more aware of the harms of alcohol use and more interested in the sort of clean eating and wellness behaviours that would go against the use of alcohol. And then I think the other big factor is to do with social media and changing ways of socialisation. There's now a lot of different ways that young people can socialise that don't rely on alcohol, whereas in our generation it was kind of the required part of being social, having fun, having a party. Now there's a lot more ways to connect and be social that don't involve alcohol.
Also from this survey, which was really interesting, Megan, the respondents were asked about what areas need further research or that they wanted to know more information about. And one of those areas was pornography addiction. What are your thoughts on that response?
Yeah, that's a really interesting area. So we know that 2 out of 5 young people in our sample report viewing porn at least weekly, so either every day or at least every week. So porn use is very common. And we have heard a lot of reports from young people saying that they feel like they're addicted to it. There's no formal diagnosis of pornography addiction, but people do report feeling like they're dependent on it, that they feel the urge to watch it, even if it's causing them harms like relationship problems. So, yeah, it's definitely something that we're monitoring and being aware of.
Why do you think it's so important that we have respondents, especially with certain generations, regarding their behaviours, their addictions, their social behaviours, what they experiment with and what they don't? Why do you think it's interesting that we have an insight into this? What's the benefit of this type of research?
Partly it's so that we can look at trends over time and be aware of emerging issues. I think one of the most important things really is just understanding what's affecting young people's lives so that we can address those issues if we need to address them, both increasing the positives and decreasing the negatives where we can.
And what kind of changes have we seen over many years, Megan, in the difference between different generations?
I think as well as the alcohol use that we've talked about, I think in terms of sexual behaviour, we've definitely seen that young people are much more likely to identify as gender diverse or sexuality diverse. So we see that particularly in our sample, we've really attracted a large group who identify that way. I think we're also seeing a growing influence of social media, of course, as well as pornography, really influencing how young people socialise and how they learn as well. They obviously are using the internet to learn about their health, behaviours and social norms as well.
It's a fascinating insight. Thanks so much for joining us, Megan.
Thanks.
That was Head of Young People's Health at the Burnet Institute, Megan Lim. And that's it for this episode of the afternoon edition of The Briefing. We'll be back in your feed tomorrow morning with a deep dive on the dark money buying political influence in Australia. We'd love you to subscribe or follow us on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. I'm Natarsha Belling. Thanks for your company.